Jason and Marissa thought they were just running a quick errand, slipping into the cool air of a department store on a scorching summer afternoon. But while they browsed shelves without urgency, their 2-year-old son, Ethan, was left strapped in the back seat of a locked sedan, slowly cooking in the unbearable heat. What seemed like a routine shopping trip was about to spiral into a nightmare that would shock an entire town and leave a haunting reminder of how fast ordinary choices can turn into unthinkable consequences. It was the kind of afternoon that makes people slow down, heavy with sunlight and the kind of heat that presses on skin until it feels like the air itself is burning. The town of Meadowbrook was not a place known for drama. Most days, it carried a rhythm of quiet routines, families running errands, kids on bicycles cutting across sidewalks, and neighbors nodding at one another in passing. On this particular day, the shopping plaza was packed. Cars filled every row of the lot, their metallic bodies shimmering as the sun reflected off their hoods. Shoppers pushed carts across the asphalt, careful to move quickly before the sweat began to gather on their backs. No one gave much thought to the ordinary silver sedan parked neatly between a pickup and an SUV. It looked like any other car baking under the relentless sun, blending into the background of the crowded lot. Inside that sedan, however, the reality was far from ordinary. A little boy, barely 2 years old, sat strapped into a car seat in the back. His cheeks were flushed, his hair damp from sweat. He squirmed, shifting as much as the restraints would allow, but there was no relief to be found. The air around him was stifling, thick, and unmoving. With every passing second, the temperature inside the car climbed higher, turning the vehicle into something more like an oven than a safe shelter. The child's parents had walked away minutes earlier, slipping into the entrance of the department store with the ease of people who believed they had time to spare. They moved through the automatic doors and into cool air conditioning without a backward glance, convinced their son would be fine. To them, the errand seemed quick, a matter of grabbing a few things before heading back out. They carried no sense of urgency, no thought of what the heat might do in their absence. Meanwhile, outside, life carried on around the car. The rows of vehicles stood silently in the blistering sun, their windows radiating waves of heat that shimmered in the air. People hurried past, fanning themselves with receipts or shielding their eyes with hands, too focused on their own discomfort to notice the suffering child. The sedan's windows were tinted just enough to keep prying eyes from seeing clearly inside. From a distance, it was easy to mistake the small figure in the back seat for nothing more than a car seat left empty. But within those locked doors, the boy's body worked hard to fight the rising temperature. His breaths grew quicker, his little arms twitching against the straps as if searching for escape. The heat was merciless, wrapping around him, squeezing out every ounce of energy. For a toddler, the difference between comfort and danger came fast. What seemed like just another parked car in the crowded lot had already become a trap, silent and hidden in plain sight. In Meadowbrook, the plaza felt as ordinary as ever, but beneath the calm surface, the stage was quietly set for a crisis that no one yet realized was unfolding. The minutes began to slip away, unnoticed by most, but each one carried the weight of danger for the small boy inside the silver sedan. The heat outside had already risen past 90 degrees, and the car's interior turned into a sealed chamber where the air felt thick and suffocating. Scientists later explained that within just 10 minutes, the inside of a parked car can soar by nearly 20 degrees, no matter if the windows are cracked or not. In this car, with every passing minute, the temperature climbed higher and higher, pushing the boy's body toward exhaustion. At first, his little face was flushed pink, his skin damp with sweat as he tried to fight the discomfort. He shifted weakly, his tiny chest rising and falling faster, his breaths becoming shallow. The straps of the car seat dug into his shoulders, holding him firmly in place, leaving no chance to move toward even the slightest hint of cooler air. The toddler's world shrank to nothing more than unbearable heat and the struggle to breathe. While this battle unfolded inside the car, his parents were browsing leisurely through the aisles of the store. They were surrounded by cool, humming air conditioning, bright lights, and shelves stacked high with goods. To them, the outing was routine, almost relaxing compared to the sweltering world outside. They wandered slowly, comparing prices, handling items, and chatting casually. Time stretched as they became more absorbed in their shopping, unaware of how long they had already been inside. The gap between their reality and the child's reality was staggering. Where they felt calm and in control, the boy was spiraling deeper into danger with each minute. His tiny body could not regulate heat the way an adult's could. For children, the threshold from discomfort to life-threatening condition is frighteningly short. In the back seat, his energy began to fade. His head sagged slightly to one side, his movements less frequent. What had started as squirming and resistance turned into weak, almost absent gestures. Outside, the parking lot seemed normal, filled with the usual sights and sounds. Tires screeched faintly as cars pulled in and out of spaces. A group of teenagers laughed loudly as they crossed toward the food court. A woman returned her cart to the corral, wiping her brow before climbing into her own vehicle. Nobody paid attention to the silver sedan quietly sitting in the sun. The tinted windows kept its secret well, hiding the fight for survival that was taking place inside. The clock, though unseen, was the most dangerous element of all. Every tick meant another degree of heat, another step closer to collapse. The boy's breath grew ragged, his lips beginning to dry. His body was overheating, his system straining under conditions no toddler was built to endure. In those long minutes, the difference between safety and tragedy balanced on the edge of time, and with each second lost, the odds grew more grim. Across the wide parking lot, shoppers carried on with their routines, pushing carts, juggling bags, and hurrying to escape the heat. Most of them walked past the silver sedan without a second glance. To the untrained eye, the vehicle seemed no different from the dozens of others shimmering in the sun. The tinted windows concealed what was happening inside, masking the small figure in the back seat. It was only chance that one woman happened to notice something others missed. She had just left a grocery store nearby, arms loaded with paper bags that strained against her grip. Sweat dotted her forehead, and she was eager to reach her own car. As she passed by the rows of vehicles, she caught sight of movement in the corner of her eye. It was quick, almost like a shadow shifting, and it came from inside the silver sedan. At first, she thought nothing of it, assuming it was a reflection or perhaps someone waiting for a driver. But then she slowed her pace, curiosity pricking at her. She set her bags down on the asphalt and leaned closer. The heat rising from the car was intense, like stepping too close to a roaring fire. She squinted against the glare, trying to see past the glass. What she found inside made her chest tighten. There was a small child strapped in a seat, his face pale and damp, his head tilted weakly to the side. The boy's eyes opened and closed slowly, as though he was fighting to stay awake. The woman's heart thudded hard, a wave of alarm spreading through her. This was not just a child waiting comfortably for a quick errand. This was an emergency unfolding before her. She sprang into action, abandoning her groceries on the pavement. Rushing toward the store's entrance, she waved her arms, calling for help. Her voice carried through the doors as she shouted about a baby locked in a car. Shoppers turned their heads in confusion, some startled, others alarmed. A few followed her outside, hurrying across the hot pavement to see what she meant. Within minutes, a small crowd gathered around the sedan. They pressed their hands against the glass, peered through the tinted windows, and gasped at the sight inside. The child's chest rose and fell faintly, his body slumped and motionless apart from weak breaths. Several people yanked at the handles, only to find the doors locked tight. Panic rippled through the group as they realized how urgent the situation had become. One man rushed to his truck and returned holding a tire iron. He raised it high, ready to smash through the glass to free the boy. But before he could swing, a store security guard appeared, demanding that no one damage property until the police arrived. The crowd erupted with frustration, torn between rules and the obvious danger. Tension grew thick in the air as seconds stretched into what felt like hours. Every eye fixed on the child trapped inside while the sound of distant sirens began to cut through the summer heat. The sound of sirens grew louder, weaving through the noise of the plaza and drawing the attention of everyone standing near the silver sedan. Relief flickered across the faces of those gathered as patrol cars screeched into the lot, lights flashing red and blue against the hot pavement. Officers jumped out, their movements sharp and deliberate. They rushed toward the car without hesitation, assessing the situation in seconds. The crowd stepped back, giving space, but the tension didn't ease. All eyes remained fixed on the fragile figure inside the vehicle. One officer shouted for a tool, another pulled a baton from his belt. The decision was made instantly: break the window. With a swift strike, glass shattered outward in a spray of fragments, the sound sharp and violent against the thick summer air. The car alarm blared, echoing across the parking lot, but no one flinched. Their focus was on the child. The back door was yanked open, and within moments, the boy was pulled free. His small body looked limp, his skin pale and damp with sweat. The straps of the car seat had left faint red marks across his shoulders. For a breathless moment, it seemed uncertain whether he was even alive. The officers laid him gently on the hot pavement, shielding his face from the glaring sun. Paramedics who had arrived seconds behind the police dropped to their knees beside him, pulling out equipment with practiced precision. They placed an oxygen mask over his face, checked his pulse, and began efforts to stabilize his condition. The crowd that had gathered held its collective breath. Some people pressed hands to their mouths, others whispered prayers under their breath. The woman who had first spotted the child stood frozen, her eyes wide, her shopping bags forgotten entirely behind her. Every second felt like a lifetime as the paramedics worked, their movements urgent but steady. They wiped sweat from the boy's brow, adjusted the mask, and monitored his tiny chest for signs of life. For long minutes, the only sounds were the shrill alarm of the car, the short commands of the emergency team, and the hushed murmurs of the onlookers. Then, finally, a sound broke through the tension, a faint, raspy cry from the boy. It was weak, but it was enough. The paramedics leaned in, adjusting the mask again, while the crowd exhaled in a wave of relief. The toddler was alive, though barely. He was lifted carefully onto a stretcher, secured, and rushed toward the waiting ambulance. Just as the child was being taken away, two figures emerged from the store's entrance, carrying shopping bags and squinting in confusion at the chaos around their car. They approached casually at first, then slowed as they realized what was happening. Their son had been pulled from the vehicle, surrounded by emergency workers, and loaded into an ambulance. Shock registered on their faces, but it was quickly replaced by defensive gestures as officers intercepted them. What came to light next would leave the town stunned. The news of what had happened spread quickly through Meadowbrook, and within hours, reporters began arriving at the shopping plaza, cameras rolling and microphones raised. The silver sedan was taped off by police, shards of glass still scattered on the asphalt, a silent reminder of how close the day had come to tragedy. Neighbors and strangers alike stood around in disbelief, speaking in hushed voices, trying to make sense of the choices the parents had made. For many, it was impossible to imagine walking into a store and leaving a toddler behind in such punishing heat. Yet here it was, undeniable and raw, unfolding in front of their eyes. The boy was stabilized in the ambulance and transported to the nearest hospital. Doctors later confirmed that his body temperature had reached dangerously high levels, bordering on fatal. It was only the quick response of bystanders and emergency workers that had prevented the worst outcome. Within the hospital walls, machines hummed steadily as nurses worked to rehydrate him and bring his fragile body back to balance. Slowly, his skin began to regain color, his breathing steadied, and the faint sounds of life returned to the quiet room where he lay recovering. Back in the parking lot, officers turned their attention to the parents. They carried bags filled with the electronics and home goods, receipts still fresh in their hands. Questions were fired at them, and their responses only deepened the anger of those who overheard. They admitted leaving the child in the car deliberately, convinced he would be fine for what they claimed would be a few minutes. Investigators quickly established that the shopping trip had stretched to nearly an hour, a span of time that, under the blazing summer sun, had almost cost their son his life. The couple was placed in handcuffs, their belongings left behind on the pavement. Cameras captured the moment as they were led toward police cars, faces hidden, surrounded by flashing lights and shouting voices. News outlets carried the images into living rooms across the country, igniting debates about responsibility, neglect, and the dangers of heat. The town of Meadowbrook, usually quiet and unremarkable, suddenly became the center of national attention. In court, the case unfolded with grim detail. Prosecutors laid out the timeline minute by minute, showing how quickly the conditions inside the car had become unbearable. Medical experts testified about the strain on the toddler's small body, explaining that his survival was nothing short of miraculous. Photographs of the shattered glass and the boy's hospital room were displayed, drawing gasps from the audience. The parents sat silent, their faces stiff, as the charges of child endangerment were read aloud. The verdict brought a sense of closure for many, though the scars of that afternoon remained. The boy eventually recovered fully, his young body resilient enough to overcome the trauma. Yet the memory lingered in Meadowbrook, retold as a cautionary tale. For the town, the plaza where families once shopped without a second thought had become a place forever marked by a story of neglect, near loss, and the fragile line between ordinary moments and irreversible disaster.